Welcome to Down to Business, the podcast where we dive deep into the heart of Ohio's business landscape. I'm Rick Carfagna, Senior Vice President for Government Affairs at the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be your guide through the stories, strategies, and successes that shape our state's vibrant economy. Whether you're an entrepreneur, business leader, or someone curious about the dynamic world of Ohio business, you're in the right place. Well, we've reached the end of the 135th Ohio General Assembly, and for those who aren't familiar, each General Assembly is a two-year period of legislative activity among the Ohio House of Representatives and the Ohio Senate. During each General Assembly, the legislature passes the two-year state operating budget in the first year, followed by a second year of legislating that is largely overshadowed by campaigning for the primary and general elections. And so here we are at the end. We did this podcast a year ago about the same time, and at that time, we were on pace to have the least productive lawmaking General Assembly, I believe, since 1955 by some reports. I can't say that things have necessarily improved over the past year. Again, the second year of the Ohio General Assembly is typically consumed by the campaign trail, with holidays and whatnot. However, we did just come off of what's called lame duck. That is the period after the election, the general election, where they really try to get all legislative activity accomplished for that General Assembly. Any bills that aren't completed and sent to the governor's desk in that time, they die on the vine, and which means that come January, when we convene the next General Assembly, you have to start completely over with reintroduction of these bills. So you see a flurry of legislative activity, lots of things that we certainly were tracking as an Ohio chamber. I know the one bill of note was House Bill 315 that I know some of you will be talking about, which really turned into a large Christmas tree bill, where I think the Ohio legislature crammed, I believe, at least 25 other bills into House Bill 315, just to give you an example of kind of the chaos of the lame duck period. But in any case, it doesn't mean that 2024 wasn't a productive year for the Ohio Chamber. And here to talk about several items of note in the past year and a little bit of what we hope to accomplish on the horizon when we convene the next General Assembly is our Government Affairs team. And we have here Tony Long, our General Counsel, who also oversees policies related to energy and environment. We have Justin Barnes, our Vice President of Government Affairs, who directs not just our federal efforts, but also oversees education, workforce, small business, and technology policies for us. Matt MacLaren, who is our Director of Travel and Tourism Policy, but who also handles issues related to transportation and gaming. Kevin Shimp, who is our former General Counsel and an attorney with the firm of Dickinson Wright, who stays on our team as external counsel, but also covers the realm of labor and legal policies for the Chamber. And then lastly, we have Liz Baumgartner, who is our Director of Economic Development and Tax Policy. So, boy, we have plenty to discuss as we go around the table. Tony, I'm going to start with you. I know you wear a great deal of hats here, not just with your general counsel and your energy environment duties, but also our housing task force. So, Tony, what happened over the past year?
Thanks, Rick. Start with the environmental space. Looking back at the 135th General Assembly, we're really busy on both the federal side with letters to federal agencies that we joined to work on regulatory reform, and same with several bills in Ohio that we were trying to keep regulatory creep from occurring in areas that involved regulation on businesses. But I think the biggest win was the U.S. Supreme Court with their decision, the Loper case. That dealt with a maritime saying that they got to put inspectors on boats and that the fishermen had to pay for those inspectors with their own monies under something called the Chevron doctrine, which was deference to agencies. We joined with an amicus brief under the Loper decision and made the argument that under separation of powers, agencies shouldn't have that kind of deference, and the Supreme Court agreed with us, and now say that the agencies have to work under the Administrative Procedures Act from the 1950s and not out of that framework. So gives a little bit more power to the congressional branch of government. And we'll see if they take that on going forward, but we'll let Mr. Barnes discuss that. On the energy front, not much was accomplished, but a lot of ideas were teed up, I think, for the next General Assembly starting in January. The Ohio Chamber testified on behalf of our members at a joint hearing between the Pennsylvania and Ohio General Assemblies. We emphasized the need for more baseload generation and for state energy policy.
And when we talk about baseload, Tony, not to interrupt, baseload refers more so to what types of energy to create electricity.
It's anything that can be dispatchable when you call upon it. So it could be oil, gas, nuclear, coal in the old days,
sure,
and anything that might have been stored in a battery. So, I mean, we also emphasize that as well, is that we need to keep innovation and technology moving forward, even though we're trying to find more of that base load. But we also then have to continue to work on this bi-directional electric grid so that people can put things behind the meter if they wish. And with a push of EV technology coming, I think that technology would be important. In the legislature, we supported the extension of oil and gas nomination and operation of leases with the state. Right now it was 3 years. We moved it to 5. It's taking a lot of time to get through ODNR's process, which really shortens the time to be able to develop those leases. So extending that to 5 years was helpful.
And that's important because we are sitting on the third largest reserves of oil and gas in the entire world. So we have a lot of resources under our feet here in the state that we have yet to even harness.
That's correct. And the other piece to that is we need to be able to move it from east to west. So we're going to be looking for policies that will incent the development of pipelines to take that gas from what I call the oil patch in eastern and southeastern Ohio and move it around to where businesses could utilize it as a power source and as a process source of energy. But we also know rumors of a comprehensive energy bill will be introduced shortly, probably on the Senate side first, since the House will be working on the budget, and that will address our electric generation need. We don't know what's in the bill, but we will be at the ready for our members to work on that bill and try to finally come up with some comprehensive policies around energy and electricity.
Which is important because right now we import at least 25% of our energy needs from other states. We're part of a multi-state grid, and we've got a lot of heavy manufacturing on their way to the state, as you mentioned, with EVs, with Intel, with some of the other mega projects. So really diving deeper into energy, it's long overdue in this state. We're not building, as you said, more baseload power plants, and we know that is going to be a key priority for the Ohio legislature. So we're really going to need to be engaged on that.
Right, and I think the other important thing in our testimony to the joint committee on that hearing was I think there were some voices saying, well, we can meet the need by curbing demand, so why do we need all of these data centers? And we kept pointing out in our testimony that the data centers are kind of the brains behind all the AI and other technology coming for advanced manufacturing. And if you chase those away, then you're going to chase manufacturing away. And then before too long, Ohio looks like the buggy whip when everyone's moving to cars. But I'm aging myself now. And before I end and turn it over to Justin, you mentioned another area of public policy that we focused on is housing. I think we've done a good job of attending events, conferences, engaging with stakeholders, being part of focus groups. And I think we're in a good place now, along with the fact that the Ohio Senate stood up a select committee on housing to come up with, I think, a more comprehensive plan around the idea of building out more supply. Since the housing crisis of 2008, 2009, housing supply kind of plummeted and we have not caught up. And I think this will be an effort to build out that supply. More supply means more affordable housing, whether it's market-based or using some of the housing tax credits.
And hopefully lower property taxes too, because that's a huge crisis right now throughout the state.
So I think in that realm, we saw the start of a plan when we created a state version of the federal low-income housing tax credit. Wasn't at the amount we wanted, but it was a start. And we also got the first-time home buyer incentive program through the Treasurer's Office. I think that was a good start, and hopefully we'll see some more dollars there. I think for the 136th General Assembly, we'll be an advocate for additional dollars in those programs, but we'll also look for things that add density and a way to drive down some of the costs. Right now, about 35% of the cost of a house doesn't go into the house. They go to things like land, fees, things outside of the house. So policy priorities around both market and subsidized housing will be front and center in 2025 and 2026.
Well, and look, housing is an essential component to workforce, and that is something that we continually talk about. If we're going to have a stable, vibrant, thriving labor pool for Ohio's employers, they've got to have access to housing and allow people to live in the vicinity of where they work. And And we know there are other workforce components. Justin Barnes, I'm looking at you, who spearheads a lot of our workforce initiatives here. Justin, tell us a little bit more about some of the workforce needs and some of the victories over the past year.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I really want to start with what's happened since the last time we had this conversation last year. You may recall that in the state operating budget in June of 2023, the state passed what was then known as Senate Bill 1, which created the Department of Education and Workforce as a replacement for the Ohio Department of Education. And that entity has been spending the last 18 months kind of fleshing itself out and getting itself put together formally and finally. We were excited about the hiring of the new Deputy Director of Workforce, Jeremy Varner, over at DEW. We think that he is going to be a very positive and very influential voice and force inside the administration for focusing on workforce development policies in the state of Ohio, particularly within K-12 education. He is going to be a champion for issues that are going to impact Ohio's workforce development for the foreseeable future, and we're excited about fostering that relationship with them and the administration to achieve those workforce development goals.
And part of that, too, is elevating, I think, for the first time in a very long time, if not ever, elevating the skilled trades, more emphasis on those types of things to the same level as traditional K-12.
Correct. And we saw that through the investment of $200 million in career technical education, not only facilities and equipment, but also just the ability for those entities to service additional children throughout the state of Ohio. Similarly, this year I was participating in an AI and education task force set up by Lieutenant Governor Husted, Department of Education and Workforce, and others to help the business community, the K-12 education community, and others identify key strategies for how to smartly and thoughtfully implement artificial intelligence and machine learning into a K-12 environment that would allow for educators to utilize it as a tool for students to gain a better understanding of the skills and the education they need to kind of wrap their arms around artificial intelligence and how they can interact with it in a way that allows them to perhaps even on an individual level be tutored on issues they may be falling behind in the classroom, and sort of what skills they will need in order to be able to work with artificial intelligence in the future in a workforce landscape that might look different in 15 or 20 years than it does today. We look forward to working with the administration and with the business community on implementing those policies over the next couple of years. From a task force perspective, I was also fortunate to participate in a Supreme Court reentry task force headed up by Chief Justice Sharon Kennedy. That was a group of folks ranging from the prosecuting attorney's offices to County Sheriff's Association to Supreme Court staff and obviously the Chief Justice, the Ohio Poverty Law Center, a whole host of organizations all focused on helping this group of individuals who is coming out of an incarcerated state, whatever the case may be, and needs to find access to housing and transportation, and a key component of that is employment. Yeah. One of the main ways to keep people out of jail or returning to jail is to find stable and secure employment for them.
Right.
And one of the recommendations that was made as part of that task force was providing those people leaving incarceration with state IDs, whether that's driver's license or identification, and any sort of history of training they may have received when they were in that incarcerated state, so they can be ready to present that information to a potential employer upon release. And thankfully, State Senator George Lang had been working on that issue kind of alongside the task force through Senate Bill 198, which, as you alluded to, was one of the bills that was included in House Bill 315 just this week. So a lot of positive activity in the workforce development space. It's something that is going to continue to be top of mind for us here at the Chamber. Looking forward to 2025 in that regard. We know that childcare is going to be a huge issue that we are going to focus on, the administration is going to focus on, because it impacts working parents and caregivers all across the state of Ohio. And Rick, you and I have spent numerous hours over the course of this year with state officials, with research firms out in D.C., with groups all across the country interested in engaging on and solving this very complex and challenging issue, because it is a key driver of workforce participation for those working parents and caregivers. And if a state like Ohio can find the right policy answer to help solve this problem, we're going to position ourselves for a much better labor force participation than other states.
Well, see, and that's the problem right now. We have an entire demographic of Ohioans that just aren't even looking for work. These are people who are college educated, they're skilled, they're hardworking, and yet they just can't make the arithmetic add up and to justify bringing in a paycheck that goes right back out the door for childcare. Right. So that's the problem here in the state. First off, the options are scarce. And when you can find a childcare option, it's often too expensive. It's cost prohibitive. So, it is a multidimensional problem that we intend to lean in on as an Ohio Chamber of Commerce. And really it's centered around three different ways that we have to tackle it. One, we have to make it more affordable for working families. Secondly, we need to improve or expand, more capacity, more center-based childcare options, but more in-home options, especially in some of the more rural areas with their childcare deserts. And then finally, you have to find ways to entice people to become early childhood workers, to actually get into the space. We have members of the Ohio Chamber that are childcare providers that say we have plenty of capacity, plenty of open slots, but we don't have the staff necessarily to fulfill the ratios that are required under law. So it's a problem that you can't solve with one single bill or one single approach. And unfortunately, it's going to be expensive. But to your point, Justin, it's something that we take very seriously as a workforce crisis.
Absolutely. So that's top of mind for me for next year. Alongside that, looking ahead to next year, I think one of the other key aspects in workforce development that we're going to focus on is college graduate retention. There's a proposal that the Ohio Chamber's been working on for a couple of years now called Work Learn Ohio. It's a proposal that we've shared with the administration and with leaders in the General Assembly for a few months now. And essentially what it boils down to is creating a public-private partnership that would match college students with Ohio-based employers to provide work-based learning opportunities that would ideally lead to a job offer and helping those individuals stay in Ohio after they graduate from a college or university. We've been working with partners in the higher ed community. We've been working with partners in the workforce development community to help share the message and get folks to understand why this is such a key issue for the state of Ohio. And again, there are a couple of other states that do something similar to this, but they don't scale it properly and they don't take the right approach to it. And we think that by creating a public-private partnership in this space, we can really help connect the business community with the talent pipeline that's being generated by our higher ed partners across Ohio.
And it's going to combat the population drain we've seen over the last 10 years, where if we have individuals who are coming here from out of state to attend our universities, the best way to tether them here and put down roots is to find them gainful employment.
Absolutely. One other bill I want to mention quickly before I transition to federal affairs is Senate Bill 17, led by Senator Steve Wilson. This would require capitalism to be taught as part of financial literacy graduation requirements in the K-12 space. Again, just a simple, straightforward bill that we think helps highlight the importance of understanding what role capitalism plays in our national economy and our state economy, and familiarizing high school students with the concepts of capitalism and what the free market means for improving our economic outlook in Ohio and across the country. Again, transitioning to federal affairs, really a key issue I want to highlight, in addition to the legal aspects that Tony mentioned earlier with the Loper-Bright decision and others. Obviously, everyone has a lot of question marks about what's happening with the Intel site over in New Albany and what's going to happen with all the CHIPS Act funding. Thankfully, the Ohio Chamber took a leadership position on this issue. 2.5 years after the CHIPS Act passed, very little of that funding had been flowing to any of the companies that were set to expand their operations in the United States. And so the Ohio Chamber led a group of 19 business groups that were both statewide business groups, regional groups, and local groups from a coalition of states, Ohio, New York, Oregon, and New Mexico. And we urged the Commerce Department and the Biden administration to finally release funding, not just to Intel, but to Micron and to Samsung and TSMC and others that were pledging to expand or generate new business operations in the United States. And it's really a national security issue. We know that there is tension in the Far East with China and Taiwan. We know that this will continue to be an area of critical importance for multiple sectors of our economy in the United States. And so we urged the administration to release those funds and make sure those opportunities for onshoring that activity were maximized to the greatest extent possible. And thankfully, we saw that the Commerce Department did announce about $8 billion to Intel shortly after that letter was delivered. We'd like to take credit for that. We think that there's a strong nexus between our urging them to do that and finally getting those funds out the door.
Multi-state letter,
Yep.
Signed by several state chambers of commerce as well as several Ohio-based trade organizations. So we were proud to have a lot of partners from different industries just illustrate the need to get those funds released.
Absolutely. And then, obviously, as everyone is aware, with the 2024 elections, there will come a change in administration in January. There will be a new Senate majority. The Republicans took control of the United States Senate. And so what we are likely to see is a very concerted effort to really clamp down on the regulatory state in Washington. Everyone has probably at least heard of this Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, effort that's being headed by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. They are tasked with highlighting areas where the federal government can cut spending, where they can reduce the regulatory burden, and where they can improve efficiency across the federal government. So we're excited about seeing where that effort is headed and ways in which the Ohio Chamber and the business community can lend our voice to really maximizing the opportunity to make America's business climate a lot friendlier. Also, we look forward to seeing how the new administration tackles some of those regulatory issues through the Congressional Review Act, something that we expect will be very popular among both House and Senate Republicans in the new term.
Lots of really important developments that are happening both in the state and especially the federal level with the changeover in administrations from Biden to Trump. So stay tuned on a lot of that. I'm going to pivot to one of the other large, really economic drivers here in the state, which is our tourism industry. And Matt MacLaren is here to talk a little bit more about that and some of the other areas that you cover. But I guess we'll start by stating that I think the state of Ohio invests right around $7.5 million this biennium to promote tourism in Ohio, tourism efforts. Sounds like a lot of money, but actually it's not when you compare it to surrounding states. So, Matt, why don't you talk a little bit about where we're at as a state, maybe falling short a little bit in terms of promoting ourselves?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. We are a great state. We are Ohio, the heart of it all, but we do only spend $7.5 million to market ourselves as Ohio, the heart of it all. It's not even enough to do marketing in every state that borders Ohio. And by the way, the average of the states that border Ohio is $25 million in marketing, and some of those, like Indiana and Michigan, have publicly stated they're using that to try and get Ohioans not only to visit their state, but to leave our state and go live and work in theirs. When you take a look at population forecasts, they've been pretty negative for the state of Ohio. I think that with the economic opportunities and jobs that we have available, especially the work we've done lately to help improve our economy and offer more jobs in the state of Ohio, being able to market the quality of life that we have here provides that opportunity to bring more workers in and to reverse those negative population projections and turn it into a state where we're growing again.
Once we get them here, we can sell them on our state, but we have to get them here.
That's right. And the research shows once a person's visited Ohio, their perception of our state more than doubles as a great place to live, a great place to work, and a great place to raise a family.
Well, talk a little bit, starting with, I know back in April, we had a unique event. We had a solar eclipse. Hasn't happened in a very long time, but talk a little bit about how that transpired here.
Yeah, the Ohio tourism industry had a good year, and it really kicked off in April with an event we haven't seen in over 200 years in the state, a total eclipse of the sun. The solar eclipse, we had a path of totality that included Akron, Toledo, Dayton, and Cleveland, and hundreds of thousands of people came to the state of Ohio on April 8th to see it. Ended up being a great event, and the reason we're talking about it today was the public-private partnerships, that cooperation that helped make it a great event. Many communities were planning for months or even over a year leading up to that solar eclipse because there were so many more people coming in to see it. You saw viewing parties at zoos, museums, downtowns, and they had minimal safety and traffic issues. We especially want to thank Governor DeWine, who signed an executive order that directed state agencies to be prepared for the extra visitors coming to Ohio to see the eclipse, and then ODOT, who did a great job in helping to minimize traffic issues all throughout our state. Overall, it's just a great day for Ohio. April 8th, that total eclipse of the sun here in the state of Ohio.
Yeah, and I think overall the state, and all the local law enforcement agencies did a really good job of just managing the influx of people that came in from not just around the country, but around the world.
They really did, and it happened to be a beautiful sunny day, which meant even more people drove to our state to enjoy, and even us right here at the offices at the Ohio Chamber of Commerce all got together to watch that day. It was a special day for Ohio. Moving forward to some of the legislative wins that we had, I think probably the biggest legislative win for Ohio's tourism industry in 2024 was House Bill 2, the capital budget and one-time strategic community investment funds, also known as OTSCIF. It's pretty normal for the state of Ohio to do a capital budget. That happens every 2 years, but to have additional funds isn't normal. And this time it was very good to see the $700 million in OTSCIF be used for a lot of quality of life projects that not only help bring more visitors to the state of Ohio, but also improved the quality of life for those that live here. To give you an example, there was over $200 million used on tourism-focused projects, over 70 projects funded. That included $5 million for Wayne National Forest Welcome Center, $7 million toward the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame expansion and renovation, $27.5 million for the Cincinnati Open Tennis Tournament that really helped keep this event in Ohio. Right. North Carolina was trying to steal it away. Yep, happy to say it'll be here for over 20 more years. $7.5 million for the John Glenn International Airport improvements, and many more. And it was really projects that had large private investment that was willing to come to the table that were receiving some of the public at SCIF dollars. And I think we're going to see some really big improvements in quality of life and visitor attractions across the state of Ohio because of that House Bill 2 that was passed this year. A few other big things on our list. We saw the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Act of 2024. House Concurrent Resolution 14 supported that. Now the GLRI is something that the federal government has to pass, but the state of Ohio wanted to make sure they knew how important it was to us. So HCR 14 encouraged the passing of that bill, something that shows bipartisan support exists because we had 97-0 in the House and 30-1 in the Senate support for it.
Doesn't happen too often, but people can rally behind our Great Lakes.
That's right.
Lake Erie.
And they should. It's so important to the entire state. We're seeing a clean, not only Great Lakes, but a clean Lake Erie mean more development in the state of Ohio. It's important to businesses. It's important to visitors. It's important to residents who go boating and enjoy the Lake Erie, in addition to the drinking water it provides for so much of our state. So HCR 14, now it's off to Congress, encouraging them to get the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative Act passed for another 5 years, helping to keep our Great Lakes great.
Talk a little bit about, and I know one of the other important areas that you cover for us is that of gaming, which has really emerged in just the past few years. This is the first full year of sports betting in the state of Ohio. Talk a little bit more about that, Matt.
Yeah, so the Gaming Committee, it's their first full year of being in existence. It's mostly the casinos and racinos across the state of Ohio. We've seen gaming grow in the state. You mentioned sports betting. Sports betting went into place January 1st of 2023. We have the results back from that calendar year, over $133 million in taxes alone from sports betting that was contributed to the state. And now as we close in on the end of 2024, we're seeing that number expected to be even more. So it's a huge creator of taxes for the state of Ohio. In fact, gaming in general generates $1.4 billion in annual taxes for Ohio. And that's really what our gaming committee wanted to do, is be able to share the positive things they're doing in the state. Not only the tax creation, but since the first casino went up in 2012 in Ohio, we've seen over $30 million spent by those casinos and racinos to support local communities. That's donations of over $30 million. Ohio's racinos and casinos also help support Ohio's horse racing industry, just to have an overall positive impact on employment, taxes, and contributions to their communities. Something we'll continue to focus on and be able to spread the word about in 2025.
Excellent.
Taking a look at transportation and infrastructure, all those that are listening to this podcast that live in the state of Ohio, you're going to have the ability to vote on a ballot issue in May of 2025. This one, the Ohio Chamber supports. It's for SCIP, which is the State Capital Improvement Program, over $2 billion in bonds that would be used to support infrastructure across the state of Ohio. The Chamber has been in support of legislation, HJR 8, that placed this ballot issue on, we'll be placing this ballot issue in May of 2025 because we need to see our infrastructure continue to be enhanced. The money will be used for roads, bridges, wastewater treatment systems, and other critical infrastructure that are necessary for the operation of Ohio businesses and the continued growth of Ohio's economy.
And this is really a continuation of a 10-year bond program that has been renewed multiple times. It was first enacted, I think, in the late 80s by a vote of, I think, over 70% of the statewide electorate.
Yeah, that's right, Rick. And it's been approved every time that it's gone before the voters. When you take a look at these big infrastructure projects, they really last out over many, many years, and being able to use bonds to fund them that match those amount of years for the projects, right, to be able to pay them back has been proven time and time again as the best way to fund these major projects, keep the infrastructure growing that we need for a growing economy in Ohio. One of those things that we hope to see improved is US 23. That's the main route between Central Ohio and the Toledo and Sandusky area, right northwest Ohio. This has always been a difficult area to traverse in the state of Ohio because this is the main route and it has 39 stoplights in a 37-mile stretch between Worthington and Franklin County. Let me say that again. 39 stoplights and a 37-mile stretch. It's something that Governor DeWine and Ohio Department of Transportation have already recognized, and I'm happy to say over the summer they did make an announcement that they are working to reduce that down to 7 or fewer stoplights. That'll make the ability to get between Columbus and all of Central Ohio to Northwest Ohio much better. They're going to be doing this by looking either to widen it's a 3 lanes in each direction, and or adding many intersections, overpasses, and underpasses to reduce those intersections, those stoplights. Something we support, but we want to see even more happen to make that ability to get from Central Ohio to Northwest Ohio and Northwest Ohio to Central Ohio much easier to traverse.
Yeah, and I'm a resident of Delaware County, and I can say that, it's something that is welcomed by many that live in that area. I mean, not just for commuter traffic, people that live in the city of Delaware and in Powell and the communities in between, but, really it's about moving freight around as well, because as you mentioned, it's a big transportation artery between Northwest Ohio and Central Ohio. So, if we're talking about the Intels of the world, the Hondas of the world that are going to be relying on supplies and parts coming from other businesses throughout the state, we've got to be able to move cargo and freight easily by truck. And, to navigate that many lights really is a hindrance.
It is, and it is for those residents. I live in Worthington, so end up on it quite a bit as well. Those residents that are trying to make our way back and forth too. This actually flows nicely into something we'll be working on in 2025, and that's the transportation budget for the state of Ohio. When it was passed 2 years ago, it was a $13 billion transportation budget over 2 years, the largest infrastructure investment in Ohio's history because of projects like US 23 and inflation, and really a need to continue to make our roads better for the state. We'd love to see it be a $13 billion or more transportation budget. Again, that will be handled early in 2025 and something that the Ohio Chamber will be weighing on and support to make it a great package for the state to help our economy grow. A few other items looking forward to 2025. We supported an employee mobility grant program in 2024. It had a few hearings, did not get done. It'll be back on our list, and we'd love to see an employee mobility grant program introduced and passed in 2025. This provides grants that help employers get employees to and from their location, provides those grants, and the bill that we're looking at in 2024 was up to $15,000 a quarter to employers for chartered transportation grants, capped at $2 million a year. We'll be revisiting that in 2025.
And again, that's to promote the practice of businesses using private companies to charter employees to and from work every morning. It complements the efforts of public transit. It takes a lot of cars off the road because you're carpooling, and it helps those that don't own cars.
That's right.
Maybe, particularly those in our immigrant community that we need their skilled labor, maybe a couple of counties away. And it's hard, again, to try to find a ride if you're having to transport beyond the county that you live in.
That's right. We want those that want to work to be able to, and this certainly helps them get to the jobs that are available. Also on our list for 2025, short-term rentals like those that are listed on Airbnb and VRBO. Short-term rentals have become a huge part of Ohio's tourism industry. They contribute to over $1 billion a year. The total industry in tourism for the state of Ohio is a $56 billion industry, so you can see how much they've grown. They've become prevalent in all 88 counties across the state, and because of that, we are in support of a statewide framework for licensing Airbnb, VRBO, and other types of short-term rentals. We were in support of Senate Bill 299 this past year that had a few hearings. We'd like to see a similar bill get introduced and passed in 2025. Senate Bill 299 would have prohibited the banning of short-term rentals while creating a statewide framework for licensing. We also think there's an opportunity in 2025 to either add to a bill similar to that or get a bill introduced that would create a collection and remission of lodging tax through the platforms for all short-term rentals that are advertised on those platforms, like, again, Airbnb and VRBO. But one of the big things that we'll have to traverse there are over 400 lodging tax jurisdictions in the state of Ohio already. That's when you look at the county, municipal, and township lodging taxes. So either finding a central source or finding a right way or a way that's easier for those platforms to collect and remit on behalf of the short-term rentals that are listed on them. That'll be something we'll be working on coming up this next year.
And that's important because, we have a hotel industry that is long established here in this state, and they have, large buildings and fixed assets here. But, you have the emerging short-term rental industry, between VRBO and Airbnb, and to make sure that they're all remitting the bed taxes, the hotel taxes that they're supposed to be remitting, and make sure that they're on as close of an equal playing field as we can expect.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then finding the right framework to do it. This makes me think back to the days when we used to be required to collect and report on our own for any purchases we made online, right? Yeah. Prior to the streamlined sales tax agreement and what we saw now with Amazon collect and remitting on our behalf. We're going through something similar, and I think we're going to have to look at how we could create the right laws that allow the platforms to collect and remit, but also make it easy for them to collect and remit for the short-term rentals.
And allow them all to thrive, that you're not giving hotels or short-term rentals an unfair competitive advantage.
Level the playing field and use those dollars for marketing. That's where most lodging tax gets spent, so that we can attract even more visitors to the state of Ohio. And we're going to end on marketing. Just where we started is the right time to push for more funding for marketing the state. That usually happens in the budget bill. We'll be advocating for Tourism Ohio to have a bigger budget so they can tell the story that we know so well, that Ohio is a great place to live and work and play. We all love it right here in Ohio, the heart of it all. So let's welcome even more people to our great state. Thank you, Rick.
No, thank you. Well, we're going to shift gears to legal reforms now in the state. And Kevin Shimp, I'm looking at you because there was a time, and it wasn't that long ago, that Ohio's legal climate ranking was the 15th worst in the country. And there was a piece of legislation that finally got across the finish line just this week. It was sent to Governor Wine's desk, and that is Senate Bill 63. It is a long time coming by many different groups, and I'll let you talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. And you are right, a long time coming. It's something that we've been working on for over 5 years here at the Ohio Chamber. And the goal was to stop this practice known as overnaming in asbestos lawsuits. So overnaming is this nefarious practice where plaintiff lawyers are naming dozens and dozens, sometimes over 50, sometimes in rare cases over 100 businesses in a single lawsuit. These aren't class actions. These are single individual lawsuits with one plaintiff, and yet we're finding 100 businesses are being named in that lawsuit, and it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't happen in other types of litigation, and so we sought ways to try and stop that practice or at least curtail it. And one of the things we thought would make sense is if we required the plaintiffs to provide some facts early on in the process about why that business is in the lawsuit. Facts like what products was that plaintiff using that the business manufactured? Where was the plaintiff at your location when they were exposed to asbestos? And so asking for these facts early on in the process, we think will limit the number of defendants and businesses that are ultimately named in these lawsuits. And that does move our legal climate forward. It creates a more efficient system. It makes it so that the plaintiffs can get justice and any monetary awards that they're eligible for quicker, and it keeps those businesses out of litigation that don't belong there.
And that's really key for people to understand, is that in no way are the victims of asbestos, that are going through suffering and terrible ordeals with these ailments, we are in no way limiting their ability to bring a lawsuit. We are not capping damages. We are not altering damages. We are not in any way curtailing their ability to seek justice.
Correct. So before the passage of Senate Bill 63 and after the passage of Senate Bill 63, those individuals harmed by asbestos products are eligible for the exact same monetary awards. And so really this was a bill focused on making our legal climate better for businesses, which ultimately is good for all of Ohioans, because there's a recent survey and some data out there that shows that the cost of Ohio's tort system costs $12.3 billion on a yearly basis.
$12.3 billion annually,
which breaks down to about $2,500 per household. And that is, costs that are associated from insurance premiums going up, the cost of products going up because companies are having to account for these what we call nuclear verdicts. And so anything we can do to try and create a more reasonable, predictable civil justice climate that balances the interests of all parties in litigation, that's what we want to do. And so Senate Bill 63 was a big step in the right direction. We passed the House with broad bipartisan support after we worked with the veteran community and even those in organized labor to make sure that what we were proposing moved the ball forward for us, but also didn't limit access to justice for those that are ultimately harmed by asbestos products. So we're glad to see that bill get across the line.
Yes. Kevin, why don't you talk a little bit more about some of the other labor and legal items that came up this past year that we saw some victories on?
Sure. So I'll start with some defensive wins. Every GA, we find ourselves pushing back against some legislative initiatives that seek to implement a one-size-fits-all standardized approach to employment policies. These policies prevent individual companies from crafting tailored solutions that work best for them and their employees, and it really puts politicians in the way of business owners and their employees. They're two biggest examples this General Assembly was House Bill 205, which is the forced unionization bill on oil refineries. That bill did clear the House, but thankfully our friends in the Senate, I think, understand that such a heavy-handed approach to certain industries is not the right way to go about legislating. And so we were thankful that that bill did not get across the line. We'll continue to vigorously oppose that legislation. And then another bill that we saw targeted our hospitals. Our hospital systems are critical players in Ohio's economy as employers and drivers of our GDP. But this legislation ignored all that and tried to implement some really strict nurse staffing ratios. In some instances, it was requiring one nurse for every patient. And that, just isn't realistic. When California enacted similar legislation, hospitals closed certain care delivery units because they couldn't meet these standards. And so, when we look at these legislation that's driven oftentimes by particular labor groups at the detriment of the employer community, it's important for us to stand up for our members and for the business community and tell the legislature stop doing this. And thankfully, they listened to us both times this General Assembly.
Yeah, and there was actually a third bill too, House Bill 319, that I actually went in and testified against, and that relates to, I guess I'll call it the anti-vaccine mandate bill. Look, employers are trying to put COVID in the rearview mirrors, but a bill like this prevents any private business, really any employer in the state, from implementing not just a vaccine mandate, but also making any kind of alternate accommodations for their employers who don't want to be vaccinated. And, this applies not just to COVID, but also to polio, to smallpox, to flu shots. And that's especially important when you look at some of our healthcare facilities, hospitals, ICUs, nursing homes, where you have medical staff that often are, have to take a flu shot because they're around either newborn infants or they're around our elderly that are in compromised states of immunity. So it's something that we pushed back against. It did get a vote out of committee, unfortunately, but failed to see the floor. Don't think it had the votes. But, again, to your point, Kevin, you've got, three different bills where the state is inserting itself into the management practices of private businesses here in this state.
Yeah, and that's just not what the Ohio Chamber stands for. And every time we see that, we push back on it because ultimately the business owners know their workplace best, and they're the ones that should have the authority and decision-making power to craft policies that work.
Amen.
As we kind of look forward to 2025, we're going to renew our push for some public nuisance reforms. Public nuisance lawsuits are one of the oldest lawsuits in the books. They originate back from England before even really the birth of the U.S. judicial system, but they've been misused, especially over the last 50 years. What we found are plaintiff attorneys and cities are targeting disfavored industries, whether it's lead paint manufacturers, whether it's gun manufacturers, opioid manufacturers. In the most recent cases, they seek to hold manufacturers of lawful products accountable for harms that may have or may not have resulted. In the instance of opioid litigation, we in Ohio are kind of the epicenter of it because the national multi-district litigation did occur in our Northern Federal District Court. It's currently pending in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals here in Cincinnati. And that ultimately resulted in a more than $600 million verdict being issued against three pharmacies. Pharmacies that, received lawful products, dispensed those products lawfully, but now, you have armchair quarterbacking years later saying you are responsible for these harms. We want, your deep pockets to pay for it. And so the legislature over the years has attempted to take steps in the right direction to curtail public nuisance lawsuits, but we found ourselves playing whack-a-mole with this approach. And mostly, what we're trying to do is bring these product-based public nuisance suits under the state's product liability law, because product liability law, it's more clear. It's a statutory scheme rather than this common law scheme. And so for us, it's important that we have more of these cases going through product liability statutes. And so we introduced legislation with Senator Adam Matthews, who introduced House Bill 555, this most recent General Assembly, that tries to end this game of whack-a-mole by essentially prohibiting any person, including local governments, from bringing product-based liability claims under the public nuisance doctrine. So it will really once and for all force these plaintiffs to bring product claims under the product liability statutes. We plan to make this one of our top priorities in the legal reform space in 2025, and we're excited that Representative Matthews has committed to reintroducing that bill next year. Another bill that we look forward to talking more about is reforming our third-party litigation financing. Third-party litigation financing is new, but it's growing. It is now a $15 billion industry in the United States. And what we see are hedge funds and other international investors have come to find out you can get better return on your investment by investing in lawsuits than you will by investing in stocks on Wall Street. And so they funnel millions and millions or even billions of dollars into lawsuits in hopes of striking it big on one or two of them.
As if we weren't divided enough as a society.
Yeah.
Now we have people profiting off it.
Correct. And look, we are a free market organization, but I think all of us can agree that the court system is not there to be an investment vehicle. And so for us, what we want to do is create some disclosure around this third-party litigation financing, not necessarily even ban it, because right now folks don't know what lawsuits have these backers and which ones don't. And that makes it very difficult to estimate the value of a claim, come up with a strategy for defending the claim. And so by putting some disclosure requirements into the law, we believe we can help move our civil justice system forward. And so we look forward to introducing Senate Bill 1, this General Assembly was Senate Bill 19. Senator Steve Wilson was its bill sponsor, and we're excited that he is committed again to introduce that bill next General Assembly. Finally, just want to talk about our unemployment compensation system and briefly touch upon the BWC budget that's upcoming. So 2024 marks 50 years since the state of Ohio last met the U.S. Department of Labor's solvency target for unemployment insurance in our trust fund. And so for the past 50 years, we've always been teetering on a insolvent and broke unemployment system. In fact, just checked, if there was a downturn in our economy, our unemployment trust fund would go broke in just about 3 months if it happened today. And so reforms are needed. What we are contemplating and what we want to pursue is shrinking the number of weeks that someone is eligible for unemployment. Right now, 26 weeks is the maximum duration someone can receive unemployment benefits. That 6-month period we think is too long. We're in an environment where there are more job openings than unemployed individuals. So we think, it shouldn't take a full 6 months to get a job. And by shrinking it by just to 20 weeks, we're going to match our neighbors to the north in Michigan. And we think it's a reasonable approach that will take a small step in the right direction to get our unemployment system back towards solvency. And then finally, one of the other budgets that always goes through, next year, a lot of us will be thinking about the operating budget, but I will be focused also on the workers' comp budget. By looking at kind of their initial projections, it looks like they are flat funding for most of next year, and we're excited that they are prudently managing our employer dollars. But we do think there's room for more investments in safety grant funding. Last year was the first time employers applied for funding that exceeded the allocation for funding. So we think we need to get the Bureau to match last year's appropriation in future years. And we also look forward to changing the law to make the system better. So there's always opportunities to add some amendments to the workers' comp budget, and we'll continue to pursue those ideas as well.
Very robust year for you, Kevin.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
Now come to our final member of our government affairs team, and that's Liz Baumgartner. She handles probably two of the most important areas surrounding the state and a vibrant business community, and that is taxes and economic development. And I guess I'll start, Liz, by asking you to talk a little bit about a research foundation study done by the Ohio Chamber about the comprehensive tax liabilities that we have in this state. The last time we did anything like this was back in 2003. Talk a little bit about what some of those findings were and where do we go from there?
Yeah, thanks so much, Rick. As you have alluded to, it's been a very long time since a comprehensive tax study was done, so our research foundation felt that the timing was very critical to conduct it. So we released this study earlier this year, and it looks at Ohio's state and local tax system and liabilities for businesses as compared to the peer locations that are analyzed in the study. The study also looks at the compliance costs that businesses face in the municipal tax system in Ohio, which is very unique. So in terms of the peer locations, they looked at counties and then with major metropolitan areas within them, and then and chose counties with similar metropolitan areas with similar growth, things like that. So in Ohio, we're looking at Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Toledo, Akron, which are Franklin, Cuyahoga, Hamilton, Lucas, Summit, Montgomery, and Butler counties. Some of the cities and counties in the peer locations are Austin, Texas, Minneapolis, Raleigh, North Carolina, Indianapolis, Atlanta, and Detroit. So some of the findings that came out of the study, one of the biggest ones I would say is in the municipal tax system in Ohio, which is very unique. So to give some background on the municipal tax system in Ohio, employers are required to track their employees and where their wages are earned and withhold appropriately. So this is a bit of a challenge in Ohio considering we have countless taxing jurisdictions, including 649 municipalities, 199 school districts. So narrowing in on the compliance burden there, we found that because of the large number of taxing jurisdictions in Ohio, in addition to the tendency for employees to live and work in different taxing jurisdictions, and then the recent bump in hybrid and remote work as well makes this problem even bigger and imperative to address right now. So the compliance burden was found because CPAs with businesses operating in and outside of Ohio were surveyed, and the results of the survey show that they believe that the municipal income tax system is the most anti-competitive tax compared to the other state tax systems. In this next General Assembly, we are going to be looking at reducing the cost of compliances for businesses and adhering to the municipal income tax requirements. And I want to make it very clear, we are not looking at changing the municipal income tax rates. We recognize how important these are in providing essential and core services for different municipalities. We are talking purely about that non-tax compliance cost. So that
paperwork.
Yeah, exactly. The cost to fill out paperwork, to hire people to do that, and to figure out where each different taxing jurisdiction has different requirements for filing forms, maybe different definitions of income, things like that. So we are going to look to tackle that compliance burden next year, whether that's through centralization. As Matt mentioned earlier, possible kind of pilot would be through centralization of the lodging tax, but ultimately I think it'd be ideal to have centralization of the municipal income tax system in Ohio as well. We did look at other taxes in the study as well. A major one that is being talked about across the street right now is property taxes. So we found in the study that most Ohio counties are less competitive in terms of local taxes and property taxes when compared to the peer location. So it's a lot higher in Ohio. This is very important because we know the impact this can have on older Ohioans that are being priced out of their homes. We know how important real property taxes are for schools. And so next year, we're going to be looking at some property tax relief, be there for the General Assembly at the ready as they come out with their report out of the Joint Property Tax Committee. And we hope that they are going to address anti-competitive real property tax rates and unvoted inflationary increases. Lastly, the study also looked at sales and use taxes. It found that Ohio taxes a wide range of services when compared to other states. So we want to make sure that the legislature does not add any additional services that are subject to taxation, and if not eliminate, at least don't add any more of those services that would be subject to tax. So moving on from the tax study and looking at the legislation side of what went through this General Assembly, a lot of the major action in the tax and economic development space did occur this week in lame duck. So a few of the bills we were following at the chamber here were amended into Senate Bill 54. So Senate Bill 54 had a hearing in House Finance this week where it was amended, reported out of committee, and sent to the House for a floor vote. Originally, this bill established the new African Immigrants Grant and Gift Fund. However, the contents of the bill were actually passed in the last operating budget last year. So the House Finance Committee ended up stripping the bill of its original provisions before they added a series of amendments. So I'll touch briefly on a few chamber-supported provisions that did end up in that bill. In addition to it being a capital budget cleanup, so there were redirects and reappropriations in there. The amended bill also contained a few Ohio chamber-supported bills, including Senate Bill 195, which creates the Ohio-Ireland Trade Commission, Senate Bill 286, which creates the Ohio River Commission, and Senate Bill 683, which provides a very large $10 million appropriation for soil and water conservation districts for drought relief. Another bill that the chamber was supportive of and very happy to see passed this week was House Bill 331. So House Bill 331 was amended and passed out of the Senate Local Government Committee last week before it was passed on the Senate floor with a vote of 29-1. The chamber did provide proponent testimony on the bill back in April. So House Bill 331 creates an automatic process to put the question of the dissolution of a village on the ballot under defined circumstances after each decennial audit conducted by the County Budget Commission. So every 10 years, the County Budget Commission would evaluate whether the village is providing sufficient services to its residents based off of a list that the bill provides. And if they are not meeting at least 5 of those required services, the question of the dissolution of the village would be placed on the ballot at the next general election. So this does kind of tie into the tax study a bit. Looking at the number of taxing jurisdictions in Ohio, this is a process, at least for villages, to look and make sure that the revenue they're receiving, they're using appropriately and providing services to their constituents. And if not, the constituents have the ability to have a say in whether the village should be dissolved. Lastly, I wanted to mention amended House Bill 315. This bill...
That was the Christmas tree bill here in
Yes.
Yes.
So it originally revised township law, and the chamber testified as an interested party. Really, we focused in the testimony on the community development authority that was outlined in the bill. Ultimately, this bill, as Rick mentioned, became a Christmas tree and did include a variety of positive provisions in the bill before it passed as well. So one thing in the economic development space is they changed the tax credits for opportunity zones. So first, they broadened eligibility by removing some of the language defining the qualifying taxable year. And then they also expanded the eligible taxes that the non-refundable credit can be claimed against. So under current law, pre-House Bill 315, it could only be claimed against the personal income tax. However, now it can be claimed against the financial institutions tax, domestic insurance companies tax, and the foreign insurance tax. So it is important to note this bill does have a 90-day effective date, so this would apply to applications filed after those 90 days. Another economic development provision is that 315 authorizes townships to extend a tax increment financing district. So now it may not exceed 15 years under the bill and may not increase the percentage of the value of improvements exempted from the tax. And then lastly, a bill that we were following previously this General Assembly was Senate Bill 224. Its companion was House Bill 224. And that has to do with network delivery services. So when you think of companies like Instacart, DoorDash, those that are selling goods for local vendors on a platform. So this bills, I should say, were amended into 315 and allows those types of companies that coordinate the delivery of goods between customers and local businesses to now obtain a waiver from the requirement that it collect and remit sales or use tax on the goods as if it was a seller. So we did not provide testimony on that bill, but have been watching closely and saw that it did go into 315 as well.
Good.
So, yeah,
Great
thank
news.
you, Rick.
No, of course. And, we've been talking about all of these bills here that we've been engaged on, and we actually really had a good year in terms of our top 10 policy priorities. So we have kind of a rolling list. We every General Assembly, we roll out a top 10 policy priority list, and as things come off the list, we replenish it with other important priorities, because there are certainly more than 10 that affect the business community. But this year alone, we got 5 across the finish line. And in a year when, there's just not a whole heck of a lot of legislative activity going on, to get those types of pro-business bills done is really a nice feather in our cap, and something that I think the statewide business community can take pride in. Justin Barnes talked a little bit about Senate Bill 17. Again, that was adding capitalism to high school financial literacy standards. Kevin Shimp already mentioned Senate Bill 63, which again curtailed the use of overnaming and asbestos-related lawsuits. But some of the other ones, Senate Bill 95 was a bill that just got done. That significantly improves access to pharmacies and pharmacists through telemedicine. And that ensures that Ohioans can fill prescriptions conveniently and seek better care. And we were lucky that another top 10 bill of ours, which was Senate Bill 60, got folded into Senate Bill 95. So 2 for the price of 1, which is great. But Senate Bill 60 creates a new licensed healthcare professional that is known as a certified mental health assistant. And with the behavioral health needs that our state faces, this was something that we got behind very early on. We think it's an innovative solution that's going to help train professionals and increase access to affordable, high-quality mental health care. So not just getting people the help they need for mental illness, but also for substance abuse. We certainly need more people in that workspace. So again, another great win. And then finally, Senate Bill 98, which establishes new identity theft protections for Ohio businesses. Another bill that kind of flew under the radar, but creates a process for Ohio's businesses and individuals to report when a bad actor has formed a new business fraudulently using someone else's address or personal info, or has taken over a legitimate business filing to leverage it for fraud. So criminals are getting increasingly creative and how they steal not just individuals' identity, but now businesses' identities. And so we need to evolve as a state and update our own criminal justice laws to go after the bad guys. So again, 5 really great bills that we were happy to get done. And I guess, the other thing that we haven't talked about yet is, beyond the policy wins, but also the political wins. It was an election year. The Ohio Chamber did get involved in many Ohio legislative races. In fact, our PAC, our Political Action Committee, endorsed 73 candidates. And of that, we got 72 victories. So we got a win rate of 99%. And we endorsed, of those 73, there were 13 Senate candidates, 60 Ohio House candidates, individuals on both sides of the political aisle, so Republicans and Democrats alike. The Ohio Supreme Court, the 3 judges that we endorsed, Justice Joe Dieters, Judge Megan Shanahan, Judge Dan Hawkins, all 3 of those emerged victorious. So, we now have what we believe to be a 6-1, very strong pro-business majority on the Ohio Supreme Court. And that comes on the heels of the election just 2 years ago, where our 3 other endorsed candidates of ours, Justice Sharon Kennedy, Justice Pat DeWine, Justice Pat Fisher, all emerged victorious as well. So really happy to see a very strong pro-business majority on the Ohio Supreme Court. And then finally, State Issue 1. I know that this was something we kind of jumped into late. We did formally oppose it. Our board of directors did deliberate over this and took a vote to formally oppose it. It failed by a vote of 53.78% to 46.22%. This was a measure that would have really overhauled how legislative districts are drawn up in this state. Again, we don't think that the current system is necessarily without its flaws, but to throw out something that was overwhelmingly approved not too long ago and come up with a measure that really didn't have much accountability and was very convoluted and created a lot of uncertainty for the business community, we thought it was prudent for us to get involved in opposing that. And we were glad to see that was defeated, although we hope that it does not end the discussion on changes that should, in fact, be made. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Is there anything at all that I may have missed? I know, Justin Barnes, there was a measure, the Corporate Transparency Act. Did you want to add a little something about that?
Yeah, so we've been getting a lot of questions from our members over the course of the last few months about how businesses need to comply with the Corporate Transparency Act. This is a law that passed Congress a couple of years ago that requires businesses to fill out what's known as beneficial ownership information and submit that information to the U.S. Treasury Department. Earlier this month, there was an injunction placed nationwide on that act taking effect in January, and that injunction remains in effect pending appeal from the Department of Justice. So for the time being, business owners do not have to submit that information, and we look forward to seeing that process play out in the courts and any changes that Congress might make to the Corporate Transparency Act next year.
Great. That's good information. I appreciate that timely update. The only thing I'll say, you've kind of gotten a little bit of a taste on some of the measures that we're going to look at working on in the next General Assembly. Certainly workforce with transportation, childcare, housing is going to be top of line. Tax reform, you've already heard from Liz about property taxes, about municipal income tax complexities, and then also, legal reforms. Certainly we need to take a look at our electrical grid here in the state and ensure that we have enough capacity and generation to meet the needs of all of the private investment coming to the state. So, I think everything is trending upwards. We've got a lot of really great forward economic momentum in the state. It's just a matter of sustaining that. The leadership teams for the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate have been designated. We have Senate President to be State Senator Rob McCauley from Napoleon in Northwest Ohio. The Senate Minority Leader will again be State Senator Nikki Antonio from Lakewood up in Cuyahoga County. The House Speaker, the incoming House Speaker, will be State Representative-elect Matt Huffman, who is currently the Senate President. So he'll be transitioning as the head of one chamber across the street to the head of the other. And then the House Minority Leader will once again be State Representative Allison Russo from Upper Arlington here in Central Ohio. And Matt Huffman, by the way, Allen County, Northwest Ohio, just to mention where they're all from. So, we have great relationships, I think, with all four leaders on both sides of the aisle, both sides of the street. We are just really excited about the opportunity to engage with all the incoming legislators. And we certainly hope that those of you listening, whether you're a chamber member or not, will look to engage with us. Let us know what is top of mind for our business community to thrive here in the state. Well, that wraps up another insightful episode of Down to Business. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe for more captivating conversations with key players and influencers in Ohio's business scene. Don't forget to leave a review and share your thoughts. It helps us bring you the content that you want to hear. And until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and let's keep Ohio's business community thriving. Thanks for being with us on Down to Business.